I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics. Messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for July the 10th, 2025. As many of you are already aware, we have recently returned from the Messiah 2025 conference, and we're getting back into the swing of things with Messianic Insider 5 times a week. And certainly, we'd like to welcome those of you who we interacted with at the conference who are now joining us on our ongoing conversation. So we have a lot to go through, in particular with our theology roundup. We have a longer theology roundup today than we do our news roundup. And we're going to be discussing a very, what I consider, significant topic. It's something which certainly gets a lot of traction on social media. Some of the news summaries we have reviewed in recent months from Charisma Magazine, among others, focus on this topic: the Nephilim. Who or what were the Nephilim, and are we going to see them return in the days before the Messiah's return? So this is something very important, and it's also something which, as I'm sure many of you are aware, can be easily sensationalized and then packaged into teachings designed to gain a following. So this is something I think we definitely need some preliminary resolution on. All right, so if you'll go to the Messianic Apologetics website, messianicapologetics.net, click on the FAQs tab right there. These are all listed in alphabetical order. Go down to the letter N. Nephilim, and click there, and a PDF file will open up on the Nephilim. So we're going to review this. This document includes a number of not only biblical, but also extra-biblical references and discussions at more the academic level than not. Who do you think that the Nephilim of Genesis 6 were? Do you believe that these were fallen angels who had sexual relations with human females? That is the debate. And as I said before we got into this, this is something which not only is controversial, but it's something which can be easily sensationalized and then packaged for an audience. So given all the discussions which I certainly have seen over the years, and the fact that you've got groups out there, Charisma, End Time Headlines, etc., discussing the whole issue of fallen angels. Are they going to return before the Lord's second coming? What do we do about extraterrestrial UFO phenomenon? We need to have some kind of preliminary resolution to this. All right, so let's get started. There is no question that Genesis 6, 1 through 4 is a controversial passage of Scripture. If for any other reason, because it is short and does not go into great detail regarding who or what the sons of God and the Nephilim were. This has given rise to some major and notably differing interpretations over many centuries. From such interpretations have arisen significant speculations involving a hybrid angelic human race of people in the pre-flood and even post-flood periods, perhaps even to be joined with a reappearance of such entities at the end of the age in conjunction with Yeshua the Messiah's days of Noah, Matthew 24:37, Luke 17:26 reference. Two principal views witnessed in contemporary examination of Genesis 6:1 through 4 are that, number one, indeed, there were various fallen angels who had sexual relations with human females, producing a hybrid race which needed to be exterminated by the flood. Or two, that there was a mixing between the godly or just line of Seth, Genesis 5, and various wicked daughters of humanity, which contributed to societal downfall. A variation of this second view would be that relatively godly male aristocrats married female commoners, leading to societal downfall. Among conservative theological resources, one will find a strong preference demonstrated for the latter view or views, being widely dismissive of any angelic and human crossbreeding. Less conservative views, while weighing some evidence from ancient Near Eastern literature, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, may favor some social distinction perspective. More liberal theological resources have been open to accepting the idea that the cohabitation of the sons of God with the daughters of men may very well relate to divine or semi-divine beings having sexual relations with female humans, contributing to a cosmic imbalance. It does have to be recognized, though, how liberals being open to a divine or semi-divine sons of God cohabitating with human females is rooted within a broadly ahistorical approach to Genesis chapters 1 through 11, where Mesopotamian mythology is believed to have been repackaged into the Hebrew scriptures. Hence, the authors, or sources of Genesis are thought to be repeating ancient tales with an important theological or spiritual message for sure, but are not at all recording any sort of real history. What does Genesis 6:1 through 4 fully say about the Nephilim? Now it came about, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Genesis 6:1 through 4, New American Standard. Regardless of the conclusions drawn, all readers have to recognize how the joining of B'nai Ha-Elohim with Benot Ha-Adam, the New Revised Standard having, the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, produced a group of entities known as Nephilim. Were the sons of God, or B'nai Ha-Elohim, divine beings, New Jewish Publication Society version, simply to be regarded as a godly or aristocratic line of human beings? Or were they actually some sort of supernatural beings? The Common English Bible actually has, divine beings and human daughters had sexual relations and gave birth to children. Support for the B'nai Elohim being supernatural beings is seen in how the Hebrew B'nai Ha-Elohim is used in the Tanakh to describe angels. Job 1:6, 2:1, 38:7, also Psalm 29:1, 89:7. At the same time, it also has to be fairly recognized how being sons or children of Elohim can regard important figures. 2 Samuel 7:14, Psalm 82:6. Or can refer to Judges, Exodus 22:8 and 9. Regardless of who the B'nai Ha-Elohim were, these sons of God took wives from among the daughters of humans. Genesis 6:1, today's New International Version. It should also be deduced how, as a negative consequence of these unions, the evil in the pre-flood civilization rose to new heights. Genesis 6:5 and 6. What was the group produced as a result of these unions, labeled as Nephilim, or fallen ones? Young's literal translation. The term Nephilim is derived from the verb nafal, to fall. The Hebrew Nephilim was notably rendered as gigantes, or giants, New English translation of the Septuagint, also King James Version, New King James. In the Greek Septuagint, which was doubtlessly affected by how the identity of the Nephilim was perceived in the religious literature of Second Temple Judaism. Reference below. We'll get into that in a moment. Lexically speaking, the Hebrew Nephilim is often defined along the lines of to abort giants arising from miscarriages or hurled down from heaven, those who have fallen heroically in a battle, the giant-like early inhabitants of Palestine. From the Kaler-Baumgartner lexicon. The Complete Word Study Dictionary Old Testament by AMG has the much more thorough description defining Nephilim with a masculine noun used only in the plural meaning giants. The celebrated puzzling passage where this term is first used in Genesis 6:4, which merely transliterates the Hebrew word into English as Nephilim. These beings evidently appeared on the earth in the ancient past when divine beings cohabited with women, and Nephilim, the mighty men or warriors of great fame, were the offspring. This huge race of Nephilim struck fear into the Israelite spies who had gone up to survey the land of Canaan. See Numbers 13:31-33. The sons of Anak, a tall race of people, came from the Nephilim. Numbers 13:33, also Deuteronomy 2:10, 11, 9:2, Joshua 5:14. Ezekiel 32:21, 27 may have the Nephilim in mind, possibly equating them with the mighty men or mighty warriors in the passage. These beings were not divine, but only at best great, powerful men. While examiners and interpreters of Genesis 6:1-4 and subsequent other passages may be disagreed as to who the sons of God were who produced the Nephilim, literature from across the milieu of Second Temple Judaism did widely affirm that there was some kind of crossbreeding between angels and human beings. So we're going to go through a number of references. From the Pseudepigrapha. In those days, when the children of man had multiplied, it happened that there were born unto them handsome and beautiful daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, Come, let us choose wives for ourselves from among the daughters of man, and beget us children. And Semyaz, being their leader, said unto them, I fear that perhaps you will not consent that this deed should be done, and I alone will become responsible for this great sin. But they all responded to him, Let us all swear an oath and bind everyone among us by a curse, not to abandon this suggestion, but to do the deed. Then they all swore together and bound one another by the curse. And they were altogether 200, and they descended into Ardos, which is the summit of Hermon. And they called the mount Armon, for they swore and bound one another by a curse. And their names are as follows. Semyaz, the leader of Arakeb, Ramael, Tamel, Ramel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakiel, Azel, Armaros, Batarel, Ananel, Zakael, Saso Mas Up Ve'el, hope I pronounced that properly, Kastarel, Turel, Yamayol, and Arazial. These are their chiefs of tens, and all of them the other with them. And they took wives unto themselves, and everyone respectively chose one woman for himself, and they began to go unto them. And they taught them magical medicine, incantations, the cutting of roots, and taught them about plants. And the women became pregnant and gave birth to great giants whose heights were 300 cubits. These giants consumed the produce of all the people until the people detested feeding them. So the giants turned against the people in order to eat them. And they began to sin against birds, wild beasts, reptiles, and fish. And their flesh was devoured the one by the other, and they drank blood. And then the earth brought an accusation against the oppressors. 1 Enoch 6:1 to 7:6. From the pseudepigrapha. And they descended to the earth, Hermon, and they broke the promise on the shoulder of Mount Hermon. And they saw the daughters of men, how beautiful they were, and they took wives for themselves, and the earth was defiled by their deeds. Who, and the wives of men created great evil, in the entire time of this age acted lawlessly and practiced miscegenation, and gave birth to giants and great monsters and great enmity. 2 Enoch 18:4 and 5. From the pseudepigrapha. And some of them came down and mingled themselves with women. At that time, they who acted like this were tormented in chains. But the rest of the multitude of angels, who have no number, restrained themselves. And those living on earth perished together through the waters of the flood. Those are the first black waters. 2 Baruch 56:12 to 16. From the pseudepigrapha. For it was thus that they charmed the watchers who were before the flood. As they continued looking at the women, they were filled with desire for them and perpetuated the act in their minds. Then they were transformed into human males, and while the women were cohabitating with their husbands, they appeared to them. Since the women's minds were filled with lust for these apparitions, they gave birth to giants, for the watchers were disclosed to them as being as high as the heavens. Testament of Reuben 5:6. From the pseudepigrapha. And in the second week of the 10th Jubilee, Mahalalel took for himself a wife, Dinah, the daughter of Barachiel, the daughter of his father's brother, as a wife. And she bore a son for him in the 3rd week in the 6th year. And he called him Jared, because in his days the angels of the Lord, who were called watchers, came down to earth in order to teach the sons of man and perform judgment and uprightness upon the earth. And when the children of men began to multiply on the surface of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the angels of the Lord saw in a certain year of that Jubilee that they were good to look at. And they took wives for themselves from all of those whom they chose. And they bore children for them, and they were the giants. And injustice increased upon the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way, man and cattle and beasts and birds and everything which walks on the earth. And they all corrupted their way and their ordinances, and they began to eat one another. And injustice grew upon the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of all mankind was thus continually evil. Jubilees 4:15, 5, 1, and 2. From the Dead Sea Scrolls. Then I decided that the conception was at the hands of watchers, that the seed had been planted by the holy ones, or Nephilim. I was in a turmoil because of this infant. Then I, Lamech, hurriedly went into my wife Bitanosh, and I said to her, I adjure you by, and by the Most High, by the Lord, the Great One, by the King of all eternity, have you conceived by one of the sons of heaven? Tell me every detail truthfully. In truth, make it known to me without lies. Was this? 1 Cop Genesis 3, 1 through 6. From Philo. And when the angels of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, they took unto themselves wives of all of them whom they chose. Genesis 6:2. Those beings whom other philosophers call demons, Moses usually calls angels, and they are souls hovering in the air. On the giants, 6. Okay, and then one last reference from Josephus. For many angels of God accompanied with women, and begat sons that proved unjust and despisers of all that was good, on account of the confidence they had in their own strength. For the tradition is that these men did what resembled the acts of those whom the Greeks call giants. Antiquities of the Jews 173. There is little doubting that when reviewed, each of the quotations offered above, from the pseudepigrapha, Dead Sea Scrolls, Philo, and Josephus, all offer some perspective difference on the sons of God having sexual relations with the daughters of men and the subsequent actions which the Nephilim performed. While each source states something different, what is common throughout all of the quotations, though, is how they each affirm how there were various angelic beings who had sexual relations with human females, and as a result produced a race called the Nephilim, labeled by Genesis 6:4 to be Anashei Hashem, men of renown, New American Standard, famous men, Common English Bible, or men of fame, Young's literal translation. Their presence on the scene doubtlessly contributed to the evil which followed and the subsequent need for the flood. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Genesis 6:5 and 6, New American Standard. While there is broad support from Second Temple Judaism for Genesis 6:1 through 4, representing supernatural beings or fallen angels having sexual relations with human females, producing a hybrid race known as the Nephilim, it cannot go unnoticed how there were some views present supporting the thought that Genesis 6:1 through 4 instead involved aristocrats marrying commoners, resulting in societal corruption. The Targum Jonathan on Genesis 6:2 would be reflective of this. And the sons of the great saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and painted and curled, walking with revelation of the flesh, and with the imaginations of wickedness, that they took wives of all who pleased them. Targum Jonathan on Genesis 6:2. The main opposition, which tends to be presented against the idea that supernatural beings or fallen angels can have sexual relations with human females, comes from Yeshua's assertion, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. Matthew 22:30, New American Standard. Also Mark 12:25. It is true that in their resurrected state, righteous human men and women will not have sexual relations and be like God's angels in heaven. Yet, the B'nai Ha-Elohim of Genesis 6:1 through 4, if they were indeed fallen angels, were precisely not the angels of the Holy One of Israel. 3 passages from the apostolic scriptures are widely believed to make light of the view of how there were fallen angels who had sexual relations with human females and who experienced a special condemnation for it. So let's go through these 3 passages. For Messiah also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah, during the construction of the ark, in which a few That is, 8 persons were brought safely through the water. 1 Peter 3:18-20, New American Standard. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment. 2 Peter 2:4, New American Standard. And angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they, in the same way as these, indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh. Jude 6-7a, New American Standard. Even though the judgment of the flood would have seemingly obliterated whatever corruption was introduced by the sons of God and the race of Nephilim they produced, Genesis 6:4 does actually assert, Ha Nephilim hayu ba'aretz ba'yamim hahem vegam achare ken. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards. Complete Jewish Study Bible. The Nephilim did not totally go away as a result of the flood. The bad report of the spies to the people of ancient Israel testifies to this. There also we saw the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Numbers 13:33, New American Standard. Apparently, there were various Nephilim or giants, mighty warrior figures, who the Israelite spies encountered in the Promised Land. Among one of the later figures, who would certainly classify as being one of the giants, perhaps even Nephilim or related to the Nephilim, would be Goliath. 1 Samuel 17:4. While he seemingly favors some view of ancient aristocrats marrying women from among the common classes, for approaching Genesis 6:1-4, J.W. Walton, that's John Walton, does have to admit, though, quote, direct lexical evidence favors the angel's view, but that evidence is mitigated by the slim lexical foundation and the plausible logical alternatives presented by the nature of the syntax. If the New Testament does indeed affirm this position, that would also be strong evidence, unquote. From the Dictionary of the Old Testament Pentateuch. Indeed, recognizing how Jude 6 speaks of angels who did not keep their own position but left their proper dwelling, New Revised Standard, requires some inquiry, especially from the Tanakh or Old Testament, and necessarily causes one to consider how Second Temple Judaism widely approached the issue of the Nephilim. It has been highly controversial, especially in various evangelical Protestant circles of the past, to think that fallen angels had sexual relations with human females, and then as a result produced a hybrid race known as the Nephilim, a major reason for God having to send the flood to obliterate humanity. But has the dismissal of the Nephilim as a hybrid fallen angel human race of giants been based on biblical data and relevant ancient views, or because of how easy it would be for some to embellish the race known as the Nephilim and then to connect it to ancient legends of Atlantis, or the so-called face on Mars, or some kind of other pagan mythology? How much of it has been rejected because of doctored and photoshopped images of various giants appearing in archaeological digs, which are easily and without intense criticism or pronounced skepticism passed around on various internet websites, blogs, and online social media. One recent publication, 2014 at least, Navigating Genesis, a scientist's journey through Genesis 1 through 11, which we talked about just yesterday. Composed by creationist author and astrophysicist Hugh Ross, logically takes one through some of the issues of the Nephilim in Genesis chapter 6. He starts by summarizing some of the biblical and extra-biblical background an examiner has to reasonably consider. Quote, a check of cross-references to the Nephilim and other parts of Scripture where they are identified by various names, including sons of Rapha, Rephaim, Anakites, and Anakim, King James Version, raises some questions about the source of their strength and other features. The chilling descriptions of these beings focus on their enormous, arguably superhuman size and strength. The Goliath whom David fought and killed, identified in 1 Samuel 21 and 1 Chronicles 20 as a descendant of Rapha, stood 6.5 cubits tall, at least 9 feet 9 inches, and demonstrated remarkable agility while carrying at least 250 pounds of armor and weapons. Og, the king of Bashan, another of these giants, is said to have slept in an iron bed measuring 9 by 4 cubits, at least 13.5 feet by 6 feet. The Hebrews used 3 different cubit units, the common, royal, and long, measuring, respectively, about 18, 20, and 22 inches. By these measures, Goliath could have been nearly 12 feet tall and Og's bed as much as 16.5 feet long. Ancient extra-biblical literature makes plentiful references to giants. The Greeks, Romans, Phoenicians, Mesopotamians, and Egyptians, for example, all told stories of great and terrible heroes, men of supernatural size and strength. Greek literature is especially rich in this respect, and the Philistines who settled in Canaan's coastal plain came from Greece or Crete. In all these non-biblical accounts, the supermen sprang from the sexual union between immortal gods and mortal humans. These giants certainly resemble the biblical Nephilim in their penchant for fighting and in their tendency to manifest birth defects, such as 6 fingers and toes. The extra-biblical stories clearly differ from the biblical ones, however, in attributing honor and immortality to at least a few of the giants. The biblical Nephilim are mortal and thoroughly evil without exception. Unquote. Ross offers some fair and compelling discussion as to whether or not angelic beings can engage in sexual relations with human females, noting that it is indeed something which is possible given how angels are recorded in Scripture as taking human form and hence being able to eat or drink. Also, not to be overlooked is how Ross talks about the role of sexual activities in both ancient pagan religion and present occult rituals. Quote, the primary objection to identifying the sons of God in Genesis 6 as fallen angelic beings comes from the typical perception of angels as asexual beings. Genesis here indicates that the sons of God engaged in sexual intercourse with women and impregnated them. Resistance to the angelic interpretation arises from 3 points. 1, nowhere in the Bible is sexual capacity expressly attributed to angels. 2, at no time has anyone documented a case of a demon's impregnating a woman. And 3, Jesus said, at the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. Many scholars have pointed out that Jesus' statement can be interpreted 2 ways. 1, it may mean that angels have no capacity for sexual relations. Or 2, it may simply mean that in heaven, humans will not engage in sexual relations, just as angels in heaven now do not engage in sexual relations. It seems reasonable that angels living in God's presence and experiencing his perfect love at every moment have neither need nor desire for sex. Angels who have broken their relationship with God through rebellion and who follow Satan instead of God have lost that unity, that oneness, and all the pleasures and joys of heaven that go with it. Their loss of place, purpose, and more importantly, of relationship with God may possibly tempt these beings to seek the kind of intimate union they observe among humans. A subtle hint at this possibility comes from the observation that sexual acts of various kinds have been part of most pagan worship practices, including those of the Greeks and Romans in the ceremonies and temples devoted to false gods. A similar focus on sexual acts seems consistent with a great body of documentation on occult practices. Evil spirits and humans operating under their influence manifest an obsession with sex to a far greater degree than the population at large. The incidence of rape and sexual assault on women, as well as on men, seems particularly high among those involved in overtly occult encounters and occult worship practices. Most people think of angels as bodiless, purely spiritual beings and sexless. However, the idea that angels have the capacity to take on human form and to perform physical functions such as walking, talking, eating, and drinking finds ample support in various biblical accounts from Genesis to Revelation. In their reported encounters with humans, angels were sometimes mistaken for men, though not for women. The men of Sodom apparently viewed Lot's angelic guests as desired objects of homosexual rape. Unquote. Ross's further deliberation discusses the significant presence of Jude 6 and 7, and how the fallen angels responsible for the race of the Nephilim received a distinct punishment for it, a sure indication how subsequent to King David, the Nephilim were widely eliminated as fallen angels cohabitating with female humans resulted in a significant penalty. Also appropriately raised for those who have issues with fallen angels directly cohabitating with human females is how human males possessed by demons cohabitating with human females could have resulted in the production of a race of Nephilim giants. Quote, one major question remains, however, even if reasons exist for believing that the sons of God who fathered strange superhuman offspring by the daughters of men could have been fallen angels. Why is there no evidence in modern times for the impregnation of women involved in demonic encounters? The argument for interpreting the sons of God in Genesis 6 as fallen angels rests heavily on this question, and the Bible offers no implicit answer. However, Jude 1, 6-7a offers relevant insight. Quoting Jude 1, 6-7a. Jude here associates the angel's offense with sexual debauchery of the worst kind and scope known to humans. Given the punishment Jude describes for these fallen angels' behavior, we can better understand the reaction of various demons Jesus cast out of people during his earthly ministry. In many instances, the demon or demons shrieked with terror at the prospect of being sent to the place of darkness and chain of which Jude spoke, also referred to as the abyss or Tartarus. The demons begged Jesus not to send them there, pleading that they had done nothing to deserve such horrific punishment. In each case, the demons were rebuked and sent away. Jesus appears to have accepted their appeal, reserving their ultimate judgment until a later time. If demons have the capacity to bear offspring by women, their inclination to do so might be restrained today by the threat of that terrible penalty, consignment to the abyss for doing so. Such an interpretation would contribute to our understanding of society's degradation and the flood's necessity. The flood would have rid the earth of anyone inclined to engage in sexual relations with demons and of their evil, destructive offspring. Yet, even the flood did not eradicate the Nephilim for good. The sin that produced them recurred after the flood. We see Nephilim mentioned again in Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and 1st and 2nd Samuel. After the flood, they seem to appear only in the region of Canaan. God destroyed these later giants by sending Abraham's descendants into Canaan. He sent Joshua and finally David with his 38 mighty warriors to finish the job. Since the time of David's conquest, we see no evidence or hint of their return. One possible explanation, then, based on what we read in the New Testament, is that the threat of special punishment for those who crossed the line was instituted or perhaps intensified at that time to prevent a recurrence. One other proposed interpretation of Genesis 6 represents a blending of the two views. This approach attempts to solve the biological issues by hypothesizing a certain kind or level of demon possession. According to this view, the sons of God in Genesis 6 were humans invaded and possessed by fallen angels in such a way as to alter the genes transmitted via intercourse. In this way, they produced offspring with the physiological characteristics associated with Nephilim. Further development and discussion of this alternative view seems warranted, but to date little appears in print. Unquote. All right. So to wrap this up, everyone can agree that the presence of the Nephilim, whether a race produced by fallen angels having sexual relations with human females, or aristocrats taking wives from the common population, significantly contributed to the great evil which could only be eradicated by the flood. Much of the tension which can arise from thinking that the Nephilim were a hybrid race of fallen angels and human females having sexual relations is how it can be easily embellished and exaggerated. Not only may we see the various giants of ancient Near Eastern and Greco-Roman mythology classified as Nephilim, i.e. various warriors, who were born as a direct consequence of gods, or even goddesses, having sexual encounters with human beings, but various other supernatural entities, part human and part animal, may be classified as Nephilim. While there is a legitimate biblical probability that there was a race of giants called the Nephilim, produced as a result of fallen angels and human females, directly or indirectly cohabiting, we should be reserved about anything beyond this. Many of the myths and legends of pagan religion are precisely that, myths and legends. Likewise, the employment of strange animals or other abnormal or irregular beings may very well be the result of various physical and metaphysical manifestations of demonic entities throughout history, without any prior sexual encounters with human beings. Moving forward to the present, many are of the conviction that given Yeshua's statement, "For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah," Matthew 24:37, New American Standard, that there will be some kind of a reappearance of the Nephilim in the time leading up to his second coming. The specific emphasis in the Olivet Discourse is notably on how humanity at large will be conducting its regular business, not realizing that the return of the Messiah is nigh until it is too late. Matthew 24:38 and 39. Just as violence filled the earth, requiring the flood, so will lawlessness multiply. Matthew 24:12. The end-time emphasis of the Olivet Discourse is on the rejection of the Creator God and his ways more than anything else. This does not totally exclude, however, some kind of reappearance of the Nephilim as a component of the end-time scenario, albeit as a wild card which is not directly required but could still appear. If the Nephilim are to return sometime in a future end-time scenario, the most probable way that this will take place is in association with modern-day UFO sightings, presumed alien abductions, and a possible impending first contact between humankind and extraterrestrials. There are certainly many evangelical Protestants who believe that much of the supposed UFO sightings, alien appearances, and alien abductions, if not the misinterpreted presence of a weather balloon, military aircraft, or actual hallucination or fabrication, are most probably demonic in origin. And most especially to be considered If extraterrestrials appeared on the scene, in all likelihood, demonic forces posing as extraterrestrials is how it would, for many, give strong credence to the theory of evolution, that human beings are not unique creations of a supreme being, and how the Holy Bible is just a collection of mythological and philosophical writings subject to extreme error. If alien civilizations can evolve on other worlds, then humankind can evolve on planet Earth without the presence of a divine intelligence. Beyond this, taking various conclusions about the Nephilim of Genesis 6 being a hybrid race produced by fallen angels and female humans having sexual relations, have been various books and publications addressing the relatively modern phenomenon of transhumanism, and with it the grafting together of both human and animal DNA, as well as various forms of genetic manipulation, technological engrafting, and artificial intelligence. Surely many of these things should concern each and every person, religious or otherwise, but it can be questioned whether the employment of shark skin to help a burn victim, or even various forms of gene therapy, classify as something resultant of the arrival of a new race of Nephilim, or should instead be evaluated along the lines of biblical prohibitions against crossing different types of seed. Leviticus 19:19, Deuteronomy 22:9. Much of the discussion of transhumanism Much of the discussion of transhumanism has little to actually do with the Nephilim of Genesis 6 and more to do with ethical discussions and debates over bioethics. Quote, the interdisciplinary inquiry concerning the moral questions prompted by developments in the life sciences and healthcare, unquote. Dictionary of Scripture and Ethics, among other things. This is a broad subject matter which goes well beyond the scope of this frequently asked questions entry, but which will without question be something we each need to be informed about as history moves steadily toward the return of the Lord. All right, so that's a rather lengthy examination and discussion of the Nephilim of Genesis 6. It is not something which is easy for a lot of people to sort through, and it is something which is going to continue to be debated and discussed as we get closer and closer to Yeshua's return. But in principle, and this is not the first time I've said it, I have no issue with, in Genesis 6, fallen angels cohabitating with human females and producing some hybrid race of Nephilim. Will they show up in the end times? Will they not? A lot of that concerns, I think, and other people have certainly caught on to this, the question of extraterrestrial intelligence, UFOs, UAPs, etc. And indeed, that's what you frequently see when you encounter a group like End Time Headlines or Charisma Magazine picking up on it. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup for today. We'll, of course, continue to stay up to date with this subject because it can definitely feature from time to time in our news roundup. Now, before we get into our news roundup, all of the links we're going to be going through, and these are things which I tend to passively encounter on social media, they'll be archived when this episode is listed at messianicapologetics.net, and then you can go and look through, read through. Also, in case some of you all are just joining us, the FAQ entry we went through is available on messianicapologetics.net as well. All right, so we don't have that many news items to go through, but what we do have to go through, I think, is somewhat important. All right, let's start with Newsmax. Yesterday, July the 9th. Jewish Democrats in Congress are expressing concerns about New York City mayoral candidate Zoran Mamdani, saying that his statements related to Israel may be dangerous. Now, mind you, this is not Jewish Republicans in Congress. This is Jewish Democrats in Congress, and Mamdani has just received the Democratic nominee for mayor of New York. What does this mean? What does this signify? More than anything else, what it signals is that the Jewish community, particularly in New York, which is the largest Jewish community outside of the modern state of Israel, needs to be concerned, because this is someone who has called for intifada. He's someone who has not sufficiently condemned the October 7th, 2023 attacks. This is something which a lot of people should be very concerned about. All right, our next story. This is something which came across my X, formerly Twitter feed. Of course, from time to time, we do review the classic pre versus post-trib rapture debate. This is from someone who says, I am a pre-trib, premillennial dispensationalist. I have studied it, I have debated it, I have taught it, I am passionate about it. I do not call those with a different eschatology opinion or their difference of opinion itself demonic, not saved, ignorant, deceived, leading people astray, etc., etc. So here's the hardcore, brutal truth. I may be wrong, I admit that. You may be wrong as well. The only one that truly knows all of the ins and outs of eschatology is God. The rest of us only have opinions, whether you like it or not. I, nor do any of you, have the monopoly of the truth on the issue of eschatology. But I believe you are wrong about, you are wrong about eschatology. I can disagree, argue, debate, but I refuse to question your Christianity. I refuse to question your motives. I refuse to question your relationship with God. I refuse to accuse you of being deceived, and even worse, a deceiver. Okay, so that is appreciable because the issue regarding the second coming, when it's supposed to take place, whether or not the Messiah Yeshua is going to return at any time to gather the believers up into heaven and then resume his program with Israel, and then the Jewish people have to go through the second Holocaust in order to receive Yeshua as Messiah, or if all of the righteous are going to go through the 70th week of Israel, the tribulation period, and be divinely preserved like the ancient Israelites were in the Exodus. That can be a huge debate. But if we can approach it all from a position of humility, we don't know all of the details, then I think we will be able to make some progress. But as we have those discussions, as uncomfortable as they may be, we are going to find that, okay, and this person saying that I'm not going to call those who have a different opinion demonic, not saved, ignorant. We may find that we have some different ideologies, some different value systems as it involves the person of God. That is true. We may indeed find that. All right, our next story, and this is from My Charisma, whether you like charisma or not. This is one of the main sources a lot of people in the Messianic community will turn to for information. And while we were away at the Messiah 2025 conference, Jimmy Swaggart died. And it's probably good it was there and we weren't having Messianic Insider. Otherwise, I may have made a comment or two, which would have been inappropriate. But here, this story is from yesterday, July the 9th. Francis Swaggart asks key end-time question. Ready for the rapture? We can definitely say that Jimmy Swaggart's passing is an indication that some of these old-timey televangelists, pre-trib rapture people, they're on the way out. That is absolutely true. Will they be missed? I'm not going to miss them. But you can come to your own conclusion. All right, from Newsmax on Instagram yesterday, July the 9th. President Biden's former White House physician refused on Wednesday to answer questions as part of the House Oversight Committee's investigation into Biden's health in office. Okay, among all of the dramas of the past year, of course, some of you all remember where we were a year ago in July. We're also seeing a lot of stories about the attempted assassination of Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. Was Joe Biden in the right frame of mind? Was he the one actually conducting things at the White House, especially with the whole auto pen issue? These are not going to be comfortable discussions. These are going to be very uncomfortable topics, especially when we see former White House physician refused on Wednesday to answer questions. All right, so back to my charisma. This is something rather interesting. Whether you like charisma or not, and I tend to dislike it more than like it. AI versus the Holy Spirit. Can ChatGPT translate speaking in tongues? Okay, so this topic was rather interesting because a lot of people from the Pentecostal and charismatic tradition believe that speaking in tongues means being supernaturally moved to speak in some kind of an unintelligible language. I am more of the conclusion that what we consider to be tongues is an actual known or unknown, I'll get to that in a moment, language or dialect, a real authentic language or dialect people are supernaturally moved to speak. So for example, if I got up and started speaking in fluent, let's just say fluent Mayan. I was supernaturally moved by the Lord to speak in a language like that in order to express something to him, to creation. That would be a known language seen in human history. Perhaps a ChatGPT could detect that. I don't believe that speaking in tongues means speaking in something which is a completely gibberish or garbled method of communication. I do think that many people who are moved to speak in what they call tongues might be speaking languages or dialects. This is why I mentioned something like Mayan, which are largely from the human past, are largely not spoken today, or they are extinct languages. So that's something, of course, ChatGPT could also detect. But we know that speaking in tongues among the spiritual gifts is not one of the most significant of them. The most significant spiritual gifts are love, joy, and peace in the Holy Spirit. I think it's much more important that we're able to connect to the spiritual network of God, if you like, and be able to ask God questions in our prayers and get answers from that. And it could regard, okay, there's a situation out there in the world. Lord, what are we supposed to do about it? Which is truth? Which is error? I've got a situation in my life, my family's life. We need an answer. Can you give it to us? I think that is a lot more significant than being able to speak in tongues. All right, so we just referenced a pre-tribulationist who is understanding of those of other views, provided you're fair-minded and you don't make statements that are over the top. This is from someone who's a pre-tribulationist I ran across on X who says something a little differently. Mid and post-tribbers, if your faith is in Jesus alone, you may be in for the greatest surprise of your life. But if your faith is in Jesus and your ability to suffer and endure the tribulation, please pause. You may be shifting your trust from Christ's finished work to your own strength to survive or to suffer, and that is not the gospel. This comes from a place of love, just like I write to Catholics, my own family, in the hope that they hear the truth one more time. I'm writing to you because this could be the last time you hear it. Time is running out. Okay, we've all run into, at some time or another, people who are post-trib, and they are the prepper types, they're the survivalist types, and they think that their ability to get all these supplies and defenses, whatever it is, lifetime supply of food is going to help them survive their encounter with the beast. Whereas actually what needs to be stressed is if you find yourself in the last of the last days, the Lord, who you love and serve and rely upon, is going to have to protect you the same way as he has protected previous generations of his people, especially, I've mentioned this before, the ancient Israelites in Egypt and through the wilderness. That is how the Lord is going to protect, not your ability in order to go hunt and fish and purify polluted water or whatever it is. But some of these people think that, well, my faith is in Jesus alone, and I'm going to be beamed out of here. And that fails to take into consideration how there were people who personally walked and talked with the Lord. They were his disciples, they were his apostles. And then there were other people who walked and talked with those who directly knew the Lord. And they were never removed from the persecution, from the lowercase t tribulation they faced in the first century going into the second century. They had to face extreme pressure, extreme threat to their lives, to their families' lives, and frequently they were martyred. And if God never saw fit to rapture them up to heaven, what makes people in the 21st century who are definitely not, and I include myself in this, of the caliber of spirituality of the original disciples and apostles of the Lord, what makes any of us think that we're going to get beamed out when they didn't? I cannot think of anything more arrogant and more, what would be the word, entitled. Okay, we got 4 more stories to go through. This was kind of interesting. This ran across my Instagram feed last night. Of course, we do get into discussions of the kosher dietary laws from time to time as Messianic believers. We recently, before going to Messiah 2025, updated our Messianic Kosher Helper book. We'll probably have a session in the not too distant future teaching from that. But here you had somebody on the 4th of July cook on a flat top griddle. You can see there, kosher Wagyu bacon cheeseburger made in America. So traditionally, of course, in a lot of Jewish application of kosher, meat and dairy is separated out. You don't eat meat and dairy at the same time. A lot of Messianic Jewish people, a lot of Messianic people think that that is a rabbinical innovation and it's not biblical, but they know that we got to be sensitive to religious Jews who separate out meat and dairy. It's not a problem. It's an interpretation. But everyone knows pork is unclean. You don't eat bacon. So how do you see this Jewish chef cooking kosher Wagyu bacon cheeseburger made in America? Well, the gastronomic temptation of wanting to eat a bacon cheeseburger is so strong. This Jewish chef, of course, had glatt kosher beef on his flat top. He did a smash burger. He took beef bacon. Some of you all have had beef bacon before, so this isn't pork bacon. But actually, in a blind taste test, you really can't tell the difference between beef bacon versus standard pork bacon. That's different than turkey bacon. Turkey bacon's got a different texture to it. So you can at least have a bacon hamburger. But what about the cheese? You can't mix meat and dairy according to traditional Jewish kosher. But you can put vegan cheese on the burger. So this just demonstrates how people who want to eat something can substitute the ingredients. They can find ways around things. This is seen throughout a lot of Jewish culinary history, especially in Europe, where there'd be a really popular dish, which, pork was the main ingredient, and it would be substituted with beef or with chicken or with some other kind of fowl. This is a bacon cheeseburger with beef bacon and vegan cheese. And I would expect to see a lot more of this in, you know, Jewish kosher establishments. So I thought that was interesting. All right, from Vivid on X, or formerly Twitter, we know that whenever there is a conflict, especially the Israel-Gaza conflict, Israel-Hamas conflict, the first casualty of war is what? It's always the truth. And we're not going to be able to find out everything about the Israel-Hamas conflict, much less this 12-day war, which concluded between Israel and Iran, until long after the fact. But one thing a lot of people do believe the Palestinians in Gaza are guilty of is, this is what the Palestinians in Gaza have been doing for the past 21 months, making fake videos with baby dolls, claiming Israel killed them, and that's how they brainwash the world. Okay, so this is one approach regarding, you know, some of the videos you may see from the Palestinians. Are they really holding an actual human child here, or is this some kind of a rubber doll? And again, we know that the first casualty in any kind of armed conflict is the truth. And we're going to be finding things out about the Israel-Hamas conflict much later, which will doubtlessly upset us. And certainly from the very beginning, my main prayer, as I hope your main prayer has also been, let Israel conclude this as quickly as possible for all persons concerned, both the Israeli population, the Palestinians in Gaza, and we can see peace in the region. That is my number one prayer. Let's see this conflict end as quickly as is humanly possible, because war is terrible. All right, back from our friends at Charisma News. This came across my X feed today, July the 10th. According to them, something historic is happening in Jerusalem. Jews are worshiping on the Temple Mount for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. Is this a sign of the third temple, the return of Christ? All right, so we do know that there are a lot of people out there who practice newspaper eschatology, but in order to, and I'm not going to use the term combat newspaper eschatology, in order to evaluate things people are affected by who practice newspaper eschatology, we got to be aware of what some of the headlines are. And I hope, regardless of how soon or not so soon you believe Yeshua is returning, you're paying attention to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. You're paying attention to the Middle East. Things are changing. Things are going to be different. And finally, we're going to close with this, and this is from Hugh Ross. Remember, we just went through the FAQ entry on the Nephilim. We had some quotations from his 2014 Navigating Genesis. This is interesting. Where in the U.S. are people citing UAPs, that's unidentified aerial phenomenon, / UFOs, unidentified flying objects? As this map from the Newfork data set of sightings per 10,000 people shows, in the West and Northeast, a lot. In the Bible Belt and Midwest, not so much. So what does this indicate? Well, if this is all true, and this is where a lot of the UAP, UFO sightings are, so the Western United States and here in the Northeastern United States, of course, you know, this is all subjective, but you don't see that many in the South and the Midwest here. Well, that could indicate that in these areas where there is a lot less a presence of religion, a lot less a presence of conservative, traditional Christian values, in the South and in the Midwest, where religion has much more of a place in the lives of people, you see a lot more of those conservative, traditional Judeo-Christian, Judeo-Protestant values. What it indicates to me is that there is a supernatural component of some kind to this UAP, UFO phenomenon. And indeed, there are accounts of people apparently encountering extraterrestrials who then, you know, rebuke these entities in the name of Jesus, and they have to flee. which just raises more and more questions about it. But it is a live wire issue for a lot of people, and we need to stay up to date on it. We can't be dismissive about it, even though we know that there are a lot of people who have taken the subject matter of the Nephilim and they have run with it. They've sensationalized it. They've embellished it, and they've gone way off the map. Then there are people who just dismiss the whole idea of fallen angels and human females cohabitating. Yet there is, I think, a sufficient amount of evidence that that was a belief held by many in Second Temple Judaism. So I just would like to thank those of you who urged me to discuss this in more detail, and those of you who join us every day on what I like to call our ongoing conversation. And certainly now that we have returned from the Messiah 2025 conference and we're back, hopefully, into the 5 times a week format, we're going to discuss a lot more compelling and very, let's call them stunning, let's call them significant issues. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and donations toward all of our ministry efforts. You can give online at outreachisrael.net/support. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.